you. Have a great day.
It's Halloween Horror Stories. Today on The Real Estate Guys, all the things that go wrong in real estate and the lessons we can learn. Our next eerie account is called Mysterious Mailbox Mayhem. To give us the chilling facts, let's welcome attorney Mauricio Raul. How are you?
I'm doing great, Robert. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I know it's hard for you to come up with a Halloween horror story, and as we talk about things, what you do is protect people in advance, and you think of the stuff that could go wrong, so really, not that many Halloween horror stories, but you've got a great one that has to do with some changes in the securities laws. So what's your Halloween horror story?
Well, as everyone knows, I hope after listening to some of the shows, we've got this great new tool out there for clients who are raising capital and doing syndications. We've got this new rule that allows us to advertise our syndications and generally solicit.
Which let's stop for a minute, because for many, many years that was not allowed under the law. You couldn't openly solicit. If I was raising money to buy an apartment building, I couldn't put an ad in the paper. I unfortunately couldn't run ads on the radio. I had to rely on kind of my own network of people and maybe being referred by professionals. So this new law has opened up kind of a big world for promoters, syndicators, those kinds of business people to reach a bigger potential crowd.
It has, and because it's such a new law, there's a lot of unknowns. They're kind of, I don't want to say they're making it up as they go along, but there's a lot of unanswered questions of what you can and cannot do, which is causing some of these hiccups, so to speak, in the securities world. But I had a client, and she took full advantage of these new rules and laws, and she decided to do a mail campaign, which is totally legitimate under the new rules.
Yep.
She created these really nice mailers. They looked like almost like wedding invitations, just beautifully high-end, because she was going to mail them out to high net worth individuals. That was her target market.
That would make sense.
Yeah, and so these days you can buy all kinds of lists and different criteria, and so she bought a particular list that had only accredited investors, people who had over $1 million in net worth, and she then was targeting those people and had invited them to a seminar that was going to then discuss her particular project, which is in Texas, and that was a great marketing strategy, which is completely legitimate and legal and something that I thought was a great idea.
Great.
The idea was she would mail it out. I can't remember how many people it got mailed out to, but thousands of people. I mean, that took a lot of time to put a stamp on because she wanted to make it as personal as possible, right? She didn't want it to look like a complete, mailer. So she mailed it out to thousands of people, of which I think she got about 100 people to attend her event, which was great. And then from there, some people invested in her deal and some people didn't, but it turned out to be a really great marketing strategy.
So far so good. No Halloween horror story, but we're not done.
Not so far. I need to put my scary voice on it. Unfortunately, one of those thousands and thousands of people who received the nice mailer didn't particularly appreciate it. She found it either offensive or this, I don't know if it's a he or she, but the person that got it didn't like it, felt, hey, I'm getting unsolicited mail, I didn't want it. And so this particular individual decided to contact the state securities board, the Texas State Securities Board, to complain, which is typically or often how sort of a regulatory filing or complaint would be initiated. Somebody complains to the State Securities Board. That's usually how things happen.
Okay.
But in the past, that's always happened on the back end. You invest in a deal, the deal goes south, and the unhappy investor picks up the phone and calls the state regulator. In this case, it happened at the beginning, somebody that my client had never met before, just somebody that was not happy by receiving this nice invitation. And so the State Securities Board apparently didn't have too much going on in their lives at that time, and they decided to go undercover. They decided to hire or use one of their staffers to basically pretend that they were an investor, and went on my client's website and went through and pretended to be an investor, made a request for the information, all that stuff, and sure enough, my client went ahead and sent that to this investigator, it turns out, and because there was no official filing yet with the SEC, which, by the way, is not required, under the new rules or even under the old rules, you're required to file a particular document called a Form D with the Securities and Exchange Commission within 15 days from your first sale.
Okay.
But in this case, no sale had happened, so no harm, no foul. But this investigator went on the website, didn't find anything, and so was making the assumption that this was a completely illegal offering. And so once they got new information, the investigator essentially sent my client a cease and desist, telling them, hey, you are violating state securities laws, we're going to come after you, we're going to file a complaint, and as you can imagine, that's not something that you want to be receiving when you're in the middle, especially when you're doing a legal offering. And so my client had to eventually hire, a proper litigation counsel, and at the end of the day, it got worked out. They explained what was going on. Yes, they had forgotten to file a particular form within the 15 days, but what they were doing was completely legal within the law. But it just goes to show the extent of some of these state regulators that they go out of their way to try and not say prosecute, but really enforce their regulatory schemes, because the federal laws have basically taken away most of their powers. And so the states aren't too happy about that, and so anything they can grasp onto, they go after. And this is a classic example of, honestly, somebody who didn't have much going on in their lives and decided to go undercover. I mean, as opposed to just pick up the phone and call, they thought they were onto something big, and it turned out it was just not a big. But having that letter, when you receive one of those letters from the state regulators, that's not something you want to have.
Absolutely not. Well, and especially when you've taken the time to follow the letter of the law. Now, I think one of the lessons here is that when you are on the cutting edge of anything new, you have another degree of caution, right? This law is not that old, and very few folks have yet taken advantage of this methodology. We know a lot of people that are holding seminars and doing informational webinars and reaching out to mailing lists or affiliated marketing arrangements or even television ads to tell people about the great investments. But I'm not sure that at the state level, everyone's on the same page yet.
Right. And so one of the things, almost my takeaway from it, and I've started now doing it in my practice, is even though it's not required, I am starting to file these Form Ds prior to any sale when it involves advertising and solicitation.
Okay.
So you are allowed to do that. It's not required until 15 days, but that way it's a lot easier form to file. And if you get into one of these situations where somebody complains ahead of time, they can easily go on the website, make sure something's been filed, and it would probably avoid some of these issues with these regulators that have nothing else better to do in their lives.
Well, that's a good point. There's an ounce of prevention, right? You could be following the letter of the law, file on the 14th day, but who knows what's happened in the meantime, and there's no reason. Is there any reason not to file it early?
No, not at all. There's no reason. You put basically a bunch of zeros because you haven't sold anything. You don't have any investors yet. I mean, it's almost an easier thing. But, you're also busy, raising the capital and getting all your documents ready, and usually the first sale doesn't happen for a couple of weeks or sometimes a month later. So
I'm guessing most of your clients at these early stages in this era are still under that pioneer part, right? They're figuring it out as the world's figuring it out. It's just like many, many years ago when we started talking about using IRAs to invest in real estate. No one really knew that. I mean, very few people knew that that was even a possibility. And I remember arguing with people who said, oh, no, you can't use your retirement fund. Today, that's one of the most common ways to invest. Same thing here. For a syndicator, this has been really good news that we now have another channel. We still have to be careful who we target, obviously. And the mass mail approach, even though they are using more of a rifle than a shotgun by making sure it's people that are affluent, that are accredited, all those things. You don't know these people. You don't have a personal relationship, and you're likely to get people with their panties in a bunch figuring out, oh, what is this thing, in my mailbox? And yet I'm going to guess that as time goes by, certainly at the federal level and even at the state level, people are going to start to say, okay, that doesn't mean they wouldn't go through and find out what happened and maybe contact the person and check out the website. But obviously, if the filing had been done, this might have been a quicker process.
Right. And even as we speak, I mean, new clarifications come out from both the state and the federal level, clarifying some of these new rules because they are a little gray and people are just kind of finding their way around.
As you know, coming up in January, we've got our next Secrets of Successful Syndication event, which you always speak at, and that's awesome. And what's great about that event is that especially your material does change because of these kinds of things, because of changes in the law. So how is it that an investor should keep up with the changes?
Well, first of all, attending these seminars, whether it's ours or anyone, that's the best way to do it, and not try to do this on their own is really what I always tell people. And it almost seems obvious, but because the laws are changing constantly, and there's a couple of new laws that are on the horizon that they're looking at implementing, you really need to be talking to somebody who's up to speed with those laws. So education is always, as we always say, education for effective action, and this is a classic example.
All right, good stuff. Well, thanks always for your time, counselor, and for your Halloween horror story.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
You're tuned to the Real Estate Guy.